Okay, I think maybe we are ready to start, and I'm hoping that the last of our speakers is also online, is joined us online. Wonderful. Welcome, Ana Maria. Great to see you again, and a very warm welcome to everybody. This is the second day of the BAM conference of Bruegel, and as you can imagine, the topic of discussion that's dominated has been energy, Russia, Ukraine, the war. How do we make it through this winter? How do we make the next winter? And you know, the outlook, the economic outlook, and the bleakness of it. We are going to take a break from this in this session, and I have been looking so much forward to this session because the topic of the session, financial literacy, is one that that is very, very close to my heart as an important tool for building robust economic systems. It starts with education, it ends with education, and financial literacy is part of it, but also more than education, also financial training, and you know, we're going to hear about this. And I am really delighted that I have the speakers today who are experts on the subject and also people who care very deeply about the subject. And of course, I'll start with the Commissioner. Commissioner, thank you so much for coming back to Bruegel and also for continuing the conversation on the issue. Mary McGuinness, who is the Commissioner for Financial Stability, Financial Services and the Capital Market Union. Next to her, I have Patrick Jenkins. The first time we see you at Bruegel, and hopefully we'll see you more, the Deputy Editor of the Financial Times. And joining us from Washington, I have Professor Anna Maria Luzardi, who is a professor at George Washington University and the director of the center, if I may call it this way, the Center of Financial Literacy, Global Center for Financial Literacy Excellence, and also a non-resident fellow at Bruegel. We are delighted to have all of you to speak about how you see financial literacy and in fact also the relevance of financial literacy for the current juncture. So with that, we will hear first from the Commissioner introductory remarks, and then we'll have a panel discussion.
Thank you.
Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. Apologies for the jacket removal, but it was essential for me to survive the heat of the moment. I really think that this event links with all of the things you've been discussing. And I think the problem we have is we divide things into sections where they shouldn't be. So to some extent, the issue of financial literacy covers every single policy area, and yet it's not really a headline billing. So I am determined for the while I'm in this role to speak about it on every single occasion. And I want to acknowledge, Patrick, the work of the FT in this area as well. So it's a big honor for me to be here with some short opening remarks. What I really would like to see is that everyone in Europe has the knowledge and confidence to manage their personal finances. And I think that would be a huge step forward because today that is not the case. I mean, can you imagine a utopia where every citizen was able to make the right financial decisions for themselves? I think it would be absolutely transformative. So just a few points that I'll address today: why financial literacy is important, especially right now, what the European Commission is doing about it already, and what we're planning to do next. Okay, so we live in unprecedented times, and that has become almost too much of a cliche. At the macro level, growth is continuing, but it is, of course, being revised downwards to 3% or under. We're looking at 8% average inflation in the European Union this year. I'm old enough to remember when inflation was much more severe and interest rates were incredibly high. And I wonder around the whole discussion of financial literacy if a younger generation understands some of these concepts that were almost historic now, but are coming back into the real world. And we need people to understand what's happening in the financial area. Now, all of the problems I refer to won't be solved by financial literacy. And I think we're all aware of that, because if your electricity bills, and we know for vulnerable households, the way electricity bills are rising puts severe pressure on vulnerable households. So no amount of financial knowledge will make it more affordable, but I do think it will help people generally to make the right decisions. And this is something, you know, that the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will be addressing soon, this emergency intervention and structural reform of the electricity market. If we look within the financial system, I want to emphasize the importance of consumer protection. access to fair advice, and well-regulated markets. But all of that said, I believe that financial literacy has a vital role to play, particularly in these difficult times. Because a person who is financially literate will understand what's going on in the wider economy, will understand what impact that is having on them personally, and then how to make the right choices or decisions within that difficult context. So those who understand all of these concepts will know that a higher inflation rate reflects things like rising food and energy prices as something they likely already notice in their bills and in a squeeze on what they can afford. They'll understand that central banks are responding to higher inflation by increasing interest rates, and that those higher interest rates might make it more expensive for them if they want to take out a mortgage or indeed to remortgage. It's easier to deal with challenging circumstances when you understand what's going on. And we also know that a financially literate person is better able to prepare for difficult times and in a stronger position to make informed decisions. In other words, they're more resilient. And that word resilience applies not just at the individual level, but also at the communal, family, and societal level. And resilience is something we do need to build within the European Union. Individuals would know the value of building up a savings buffer in case they face unexpected expenses, or they can weigh up the best type of contract for the utility at home. And indeed, on this particular point, there's huge interest now, and you hear many advertisements across the member states around how you can manage the bills you're paying, particularly electricity, and work around peak, off-peak and peak time supplies. Those factors at the individual level have a wider impact. So having all this knowledge, understanding what's going on has a bigger impact. And again, if we have more resilient individuals, it leads to this much more resilient society, a better informed society where people are aware of and also can share their opinions about what's happening in their economies, because knowledge is power. Now, the truth and the reason why I'm glad that you're having this conversation today is that the levels of financial literacy in the European Union are still too low, with a lot of variation amongst member states. And low financial literacy has a disproportionate effect on the most vulnerable groups in our society. And the most vulnerable groups are more vulnerable now than ever. So the idea that they lack the skills around financial literacy puts them in a particularly difficult place, and we do need to address that. We also know that women's financial literacy levels are generally lower than men's. At the same time, women also tend to be more financially vulnerable, especially as they grow older, when they face the consequences of living longer, which I'm not against. I rather enjoy that concept. But here's what the problem is. If you earn less than men over your lifetime, your pension is less. And indeed, I just would mention that today we have a very strong package from the Commission on caring, how we're going to manage the care of both young and older people because of demographic changes within the European Union. So these are important points. Financial vulnerability and lack of financial literacy are problems that compound each other. And when I took this role back in October 2020, I was aware of this just from general conversations, and I really wanted to make this part of my work within this College of Commissioners. So I'm glad that people are talking about financial literacy now, and we're getting member states engaged. I do think we can boost financial literacy by taking action at the EU level. Doing that can help member states learn from each other and exchange ideas and boost levels of financial literacy across Europe. But of course, the big piece of work that I want to reference now is the Financial Competence Framework, which the Commission has developed with the OECD. And this framework sets out in detail the different knowledge, skills, and attitudes that adults need to have in order to be financially literate. And could be down to simple things, which sound simple, like drawing up a budget, because the framework asks individuals if they understand what budgeting is, why it's important, how to create regular budget planning with their income, their saving, and their spending, and is motivated to consider their budget when they're making decisions about their spending. So they don't spend first and then wonder why the coffers are dry at the end of the month. The framework we've developed is flexible, so you can pick out the parts most relevant to the audience you're delivering the message to. So if you're training people who've just started in their job, their first job, it could focus on filing pay slips for future reference, or indeed thinking about your pension early in your career. And that's another topic that it does and is getting attention. In creating this framework, we really considered how best to address the world we live in now. The digitalization of finance means many new things to learn and understand. So this framework considers whether an adult knows how to choose between different digital payment methods and about the risks of crypto. Sustainability has also moved from the fringes to the very heart of the financial system, including in personal finance. So the framework asks whether someone understands what greenwashing is, or how they might align their personal finances with their sustainability preferences. And finally, the framework highlights the competence that help build up financial resilience, and that could help develop measures aimed at financially vulnerable groups. So the framework includes competence on balancing short-term and long-term plans and taking steps to avoid over-indebtedness. Overall, our goal is for member states, universities, colleges, banks, companies, or individuals, and anyone who wants to use this framework in their work. It can help develop policies, education programs, or learning materials. And this initiative will help us build a shared understanding of what financial literacy means across the whole of the European Union. It will also help us better assess financial literacy levels and evaluate different initiatives. We launched this initiative at the start of the year, and it's already being put to good use. Member states, including Austria, Italy, and Portugal, have stated that they will incorporate the framework into their national financial literacy strategy. The Croatian National Bank has an initiative for short broadcasts for public TV and radio. The Latvian Minister of Education and Science is creating learning modules on digital finance. The Italian securities regulator is running webinars on sustainable finance. The private sector is also using this framework for their own initiatives. For example, game apps about personal finance, financial education guides, or training for experts preparing seminars on financial education. All of these examples build on the financial competence framework. And there is more work to do and more on the way. Again, working with the OECD, we will prepare the next financial competence framework. This one is aimed specifically at children and young people. We know young people tend to measure lower on financial literacy, and they are a digital native generation with all the opportunities and the challenges that brings, including in finance. So this is a vital piece of work that we will release next year. Also coming next year is a new retail investment strategy. I've mentioned this previously in speeches. And this will include financial literacy within the wider context of our work to help citizens participate in European capital markets in an informed and confident way. That context includes the accessibility of disclosures, also in a digital environment, the quality of advice, and the suitability of products. And finally, I want to give just a sneak preview of something coming later this month. We will release a Eurobarometer that surveyed people across all 27 member states on their attitudes and behaviour when it comes to their own personal finances. Across the EU as a whole, respondents said they are relatively confident managing their own finances. In fact, 86% said they are either quite or very confident. But there is more food for thought in the detail, whether that relative confidence means people are getting the most out of their money. Only 29% switched provider for one of their financial services or products in the last 5 years. So you might ask if people are comparing different offers and choosing the one that suits them best, or whether digital finance really widens access for every citizen, with more than a third of respondents aged over 55 not very confident in managing their money online. So just briefly and in conclusion, The Commission, all of us, my colleagues, were working really hard to keep financial literacy as a top priority because it has such a positive impact when we get it right. But we won't be able to do this on our own or by ourselves. We need push, we need to work with our member states. So that's why I'm delighted to join this very distinguished panel. Anna Maria is one of those who's been pushing this way before me, so I salute your work in the past and your commitment today. It's important that you do that. Patrick, I've mentioned already that the FT is doing its work, and I commend you for that. Maria, you and Bruegel are showing commitment by hosting this panel, and I look forward to our conversations. It troubles me that any citizen in vulnerable households, that their lives are made more difficult because they don't have access to the knowledge and skills. And therefore, in these very difficult times that you've been discussing, it's actually much more urgent now that we talk about this. And not only talk about it, deliver at the member state level and improve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioners. You've given us so much to think about, but also thank you very much for the initiatives that you have done at DG FISMA under your leadership together with the OECD. These are invaluable to the cause. And now we also hear, and Anna Maria will be delighted to hear this, that there is data produced that we can download and we can use to advance the issue of financial literacy. And with that, if I may turn to you, Anna, tell us a few introductory remarks, and then I will go to some questions. One thing I will say is that I forgot to mention that Anna Maria is also the person who was the chairing the committee who designed the financial literacy strategy in Italy, and therefore she's not only a thinker about financial literacy but also a doer, if I may call it this way. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria, and sorry not to be able to be in Brussels today, but school has started in the US and I have to be here and teach the personal finance courses I teach at the George Washington University. I'm really delighted to be here today. I'm delighted to be here with you and in particular with Commissioner McGuinness and with Patrick Jenkins. So thank you again. I want to echo what the Commissioner said, which is that financial literacy is an essential skill to participate to society and navigate the economy. And it becomes more important in challenging times, in times of crisis. And we have witnessed this, for example, starting with the financial crisis that started in the US, for example, in 2007 and 2008, and all of the other difficult times that we have witnessed. What we have seen is that financial literacy is a shield that can protect people, for example, against shocks, big and small, including the shock that we have experienced lately. And I want, for example, to focus just on one of the episode or the economic shocks that we are witnessing, and I'm talking about inflation. And I say that because we have, for example, measured financial literacy with respect to whether people know the effect of inflations. And one of the big three financial literacy questions, for example, do include whether people know inflations. And what we have seen, for example, in the US is only 55% of Americans know about inflation. And unfortunately, that knowledge is very low among the young, among those with low income and education. And as the Commissioner has said, these are already the most vulnerable groups. And in a time now where inflation is going to affect each of us, we have to pay attention and be particularly careful about, for example, the vulnerable groups. And this is why it's so important to continue to talk about financial literacy. And I want to also repeat what has already been said. When we do look at financial literacy, we do see that it is very low and stubbornly so. So unfortunately, even today, we have very low level of financial literacy, and I would say inadequate often to be able to deal with the complexity of the world in which we live in. And this is why, more than ever, it is important to talk about financial education and to promote financial education. This is, of course, one of the things that we are doing in Italy that we are very passionate about, and in particularly trying to target the vulnerable groups. But I want to say today and continue to repeat that financial education is important and it works. And one of the findings we had, in particularly in our more recent studies, is that we have found, looking at the evidence in as many as 33 countries and looking at the evaluation of the most rigorous financial education programs, is that the financial education not only works, but it is cost effective. And because we have policymakers here today, I want to repeat that word. Financial education doesn't have to be expensive. It is often costing not very much. And as I say, always for health, prevention is much cheaper and better than the cure. And another characteristic I want to mention of the study we have done is that financial education works across age groups. So in other words, it's not just effective among the young, but it also is effective among the older population. And in that respect, I also want to mention another data or another number, and I hope you realize by now that I am a nerd when it comes to financial literacy, is that overall, and in 2022, so looking at the most recent data, we have found that people spend as many as 7 hours per week dealing with and thinking about personal finance issues. So almost an entire day of work is spent dealing with personal finance issues. And of these 7 hours, 3 are at work. So, we promoting financial literacy is a win-win for everybody. We can all benefit for financial literacy. We might not have to spend so many hours dealing with personal finance issues, and it benefits not just the workers and the individual, but it also benefits the employer. It also benefits society. And I know I want to speak very briefly or just provide briefly some numbers. So I just want to conclude with a final thoughts, which is that it takes visionary leaders to promote financial literacy. Why? Because the benefits are in the future and often in the distant futures. So we need leaders that are able to look ahead and to reimagine the future. And this is why I am so happy to be here today with a leader like Commissioner McGuinness, with a visionary person like Patrick Jenkins, the deputy editor of one of the best newspaper in the world, and with one of the best think tank in the world that had the vision to add financial literacy to their annual program. I want to continue to repeat it. The time for financial literacy is now. And what I mean with that is the time to act is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please. Thank you very much, Anna. That's really, really wonderful. And we'll come back to a few more detailed questions about specific groups. I know you're passionate about financial literacy for women, but also more vulnerable groups. But before I do that, I would also like to give the floor to Patrick. Thank you for coming to Brussels to tell us about your vision about financial literacy and also how that vision has guided the initiatives, the very visible and valuable initiatives that we see at the Financial Times. Please.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here. I just wanted to pick up maybe to start and to frame what I was going to say on a couple of the things that the Commissioner has mentioned and that Anna Maria mentioned in terms of how much of an issue a lack of financial literacy is in the world. Because I think Anna Maria was involved in a key study which led to a genuinely global look at financial literacy levels, which I think was then ultimately pulled together by the World Bank. But it showed that on average, only a third of the world population, adult population, is deemed financially literate. And that is by a fairly, I don't know if you'd agree, Anna Maria, a reasonably generous definition of financial literacy as well. It's not saying, you know, you need to score 100% on this test. It's something like 60% pass mark. I can't remember, Anna Maria, but it's really quite shocking. 2/3 of the world is financially illiterate. And that applies in developed markets as well as in developing markets. In Europe, as the Commissioner mentioned, there is a broad range, but it kind of ranges from a third to 2/3. It's, you know, it's really quite shocking. And if that stat applied to literacy, i.e. the ability to read and write, we would treat it as a genuine scandal. And for some reason, we don't. Even though the effects of it, financial illiteracy, are very similar to the effects of the inability to read and write, probably even worse. You know, it holds back, obviously, earning levels, therefore the tax base. It correlates with young offending, imprisonment. It correlates with mental health issues, wellness issues. I mean, it's really quite profound. So that's one of the reasons why we at the Financial Times thought it was our duty really to do. We spent our lives writing about finance. We wanted to try and do something that didn't just appeal to those who are already financially literate and, you know, earn their livings through finance, but actually help to educate those who are left behind, if you like. And as the Commissioner said, I totally agree. It has to start with young people. It has to be a broad-based youth initiative, and that's what the charity that we set up a year ago is focused on. So the FT Financial Literacy and Inclusion Campaign, bit of a mouthful, but we shorten it to FLIC. And we are very much focused on 3 broad constituencies, but focusing particularly right now on the first of those, young people of secondary school age, and developing a detailed program, detailed curriculum, which can be rolled out across schools. We're starting in the UK, but we have broad ambitions moving into Europe next year, we hope. I hope to follow up and talk to you about this at some point, and then into other markets around the world gradually over the coming years. And you mentioned, I think, budgeting. You mentioned crypto. These are 2. We've developed 3 of our core 8 programs so far. 2 of them are on budgeting and crypto. These are things that are absolutely crucial. Obviously, budgeting right now, because of the cost of living crisis, is a crucial skill which not enough people have. Crypto is obviously a buzzword and a buzz investing theme at the moment, but it's alarming how few people understand the risk associated with it, and how it fits in with the broader kind of money and investing landscape. And we find that we think that there's powerful work for us to do in both educating and kind of cautioning people, but also in empowering them and giving them kind of visions for what can be achieved through understanding money. So we absolutely don't want to be a kind of nannying young people. That wouldn't win us many eager listeners, I don't think. So it's very important to engage people. And we find, for example, the module we've developed on crypto is a great way to engage people, because all young people have heard of crypto. Many of them have spent money on it, but without, as I say, necessarily understanding enough about it. But it's a great way in to start talking about other things. What is money? What is investing? What is risk? And you really catch people's attention. They're very, very eager to learn. Many young people want to know how to make money. They obviously would like to know how not to lose it as well. So, you know, it's a crucial bit of foundational education. I just remember back to when at school I did a maths A level. I didn't do an economics A level, but many of my friends did. But if you didn't do either of those subjects, you learned nothing about the world of finance. Even doing maths A level, I learned relatively little. I could understood calculus and how to do many complicated pure maths problems, but I never got taught what a mortgage was or a fixed term loan. So these are crucial things that should not just be taught to people who study the subjects, but also across the board. I could go on and on, but I think that's probably enough of a foundation to leave it.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, and as Anna has told me many times, financial literacy is not just about being able to do the math; it's about being able to use it. So how do you put that to use, right? So thank you all three for. I mean, it's so much to go. You've given us so much interesting things to discuss. I will start by asking you, Commissioner, for your reactions, but also I want to set the record straight. I mean, I'd like to ask you the following question. Financial literacy is part of education, and education, certainly in Europe, is very much the competency of the countries. They decide what people learn and when they learn it. Why is DigiFISMA interested in financial literacy, and what can it do about it?
Well, I suppose what I've been doing is highlighting the work that DigiFISMA was doing anyway. I'm giving it more attention because I think it's crucial for all the reasons, Patrick, that you have outlined. And we're not getting resistance from member states because I think there's also an understanding that if citizens are financially literate and if we have good programs at the EU level or we share knowledge between member states, that's all to the good. And if you look back in more recent times, health wasn't a competence of the European Union, but come COVID and suddenly health becomes a European issue. So I think it's within that same structure. And probably member states are trying to choose or pick and choose as to what would work for them. So we're not saying exactly what needs to be done. We're making this a big topic and looking for feedback and engagement from the member states. I'm obviously older and not wiser, but Patrick, you really raised an important point. I was lucky to study accounting and business and finance, and then a diploma in accounting and finance. But if I hadn't done any of that, there was no place where I would have learned all the bits I know, which actually are useful even in this role, and it's a long time ago. Those skills you learn young stay with you. It's a little bit like history. I worry that too few people understand and study history, because if you don't know what happened, then it's hard to understand why things are the way they are today. The trouble with money is that if you don't understand the basic concepts, you'll always struggle. And those who are already struggling are the ones that struggle most. So I think there's a moral and ethical reason to do this. And again, the member states are very open to working with us. So there is an opportunity for us to do something. I think you're right, Anna Maria, the results will not be tomorrow. But, you know, I'm not in this job for tomorrow. I'm in this job, well, for many reasons, which I won't go into now, but I'm in it because when I have the responsibility, I see it amongst my citizens. I see it in my family. This is a real issue. It's almost so simple that we haven't done anything about it up to now, but now we are. And in times where we're really uncertain about everything at the moment, I think now is a very, very good time for us to accelerate our work and start young. We used to have piggy banks and things like that. I don't know if they do. Digital piggy banks probably are new, but I mean, there's a huge opportunity here and there can only be good outcomes from it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for a very clear answer, actually. Anna, if I may turn to you, one of the biggest discussions in the Bruegel meeting this year was inflation, and you raised this as well. And one of the things that we see in the numbers is that the poor and the least educated are disproportionately affected. And, you know, they are also the ones, as you pointed, that have the least financial literacy skills that are needed to prepare for situations like this. So, there is a great correlation, is there not, between financial literacy and financial vulnerability? Yeah. And what are the types of things that, certainly in the current circumstances, is very relevant? What type of policies can we think of that can help those that are financially and financially literacy vulnerable?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for this question. So you raised two important points. One has to do with equity. And I want to continue to repeat this, and many have already mentioned, which is that financial illiteracy is particularly prevalent among the most vulnerable group. And this is why we have to think about how is it possible, how can we not leave anyone behind? And we have to think, in addition to thinking of national strategies and so on, to also think of this particularly vulnerable group, which are, for example, much more affected by inflation, but are also much more affected by other issues related to financial illiteracy. And I think that more than ever, we have to use this time. I think in time of crisis, there is a door of opportunities to act and act more and act fast. And because I think we have witnessed so much the effect of financial illiteracy, I think more than ever, we need urgent changes, urgent policies about financial illiteracy. And I do think that even though it's at the national level that certain policy have to be done, it is time, and I think the time is come to see financial education in school. And financial education in school does three things. First of all, it educates the young, not just the young in general. It allows and it gives access to those people who do not have any access to financial education. They wouldn't have it in their family, they wouldn't have it in their environment. So the school is a level playing field. If we want to help the vulnerable, this is where we have to do it. And by doing it in the school, we invest in the young, which are our future. And that's a very important and second reason why we need it in the school. But third, and we have seen this in Italy as well, that via the school, we can also reach the parents. We can also reach the adults. So the school is another way to actually reach the population. So I do not want, and I want to focus in particular in financial education in the school, because I think we have seen and we have discussed this over and over and over, but this is the place where it is still missing. For example, only Portugal or a few other countries have been implementing and making financial literacy mandatory in school. I think the time has come. Financial illiteracy today is like being unable to read and write. You cannot participate to society. Policymaker and everybody is going to pay a cost of that. And so I do think we need to convince the education minister that it is time to add financial education in school.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that. Is my microphone on? Yes, it's better. Yeah. I totally agree with Anna Maria. I think this is absolutely essential, and it shouldn't be, coming back to your point, it shouldn't be expensive necessarily. It should be feasible to do as part of the curriculum. And our charity has run multiple pilots showing, as I say, kind of great student interest in this. So it's a kind of, there's a ready market for it, if you like, in that sense. But over and above that, I do think it's really important that when we're talking about young people's access to basic information, we also think beyond the confines of the academic study at school, because there are perhaps the most vulnerable, potentially most vulnerable segment of society. It's maybe less engaged in academic study, and we need to reach them in other ways, which is why Flick is very focused on developing engaging social media video content, particularly using Instagram, using TikTok, using established and vetted influencers that can communicate the key messages in ways that really appeal to the young people, because they look like them. They are they don't look like me, and I think that that in a way that complements the educational curriculum is a kind of key way to be a catch-all, if you like.
Yeah. Just on that point about social media and TikTok, I don't want that everyone understands everything about the financial system, but I don't think people are confident asking questions. And the worry I have with social media, okay, you vet the ones that you use, but a lot of young people get their advice from social media and they accept it as read. So that's where I worry that there's no way that they don't question enough. How do we push that idea of questioning?
I totally agree. And there is some really bad, crypto scandals, for example, have been pumped via social media. A lot of people have lost a lot of money because they believed unscrupulous influencers. Given how widespread it is, how young people just watch social media as a core part of their everyday lives, we just feel we can't ignore it. We have to enter that space, and we see it as a valuable role to try and, brand, add our kind of mark of approval, if you like, in as much as we have a brand that young people are going to know or care about. But if we can kind of establish something that is going to be trustworthy, we think that's the way to do it. We can't just leave it as a Wild West, if you like.
Yeah, and I think you have to use that. One other point in relation to schools, and I'm very aware of this, we are as a society generally asking schools to do more and more around diet, around mental health, around financial literacy. And because I know the pressures on teachers, it's something we need to take account of. And it probably requires us to look at what is going on in schools and what part of the curriculum would this slot into without being an added burden. And the second quick point was I was in the European Parliament yesterday. There was a lot of young people. The EPP had organised a seminar the chamber was full of young people. And I made some observations around the financial system of the future, and I mentioned crypto and the risks. And as I was going out, this very young gentleman came up and said, "What do you mean risks in crypto?" So in other words, they are investing. I mean, I know, even some are only dabbling, others are going deeper. And they are worried now about all of this talk of risks. So, I mean, the fact that they are doing this, it means social media is a very important way of reaching them. But there is also the requirement, which is beyond my pay grade, about how we have discerning minds. So, because all of us can be duped, and indeed many of us have. So, how do we build in children as they grow older to not accept everything, but to ask questions about it? Because very often, I've seen this happen, people go into a financial institution, for example, and look for a loan, and they almost accept everything without questioning. So I think that there are other things we need to talk about as well around just the basic skills of what a mortgage is and what an interest rate is.
In fact, you're raising a point which I think is very interesting, which is like, regulation can only protect you that much.
Yeah.
After that, you need to have your own skills to be able to, understand we cannot protect you from every risk, every conceivable risk. And the crypto world is a great trap for risks that are unknown from here to eternity, because the crypto is evolving all the time. I would like to bring the audience in if there are questions. So perhaps there's more questions and I come back to some of the issues. I see Jacob, right? Jacob, and then there is one more question there.
Jakob Kierkegaard from the Peterson Institute in Washington. Question: some years ago, actually a number of years ago now, George W. Bush proposed changing the American retirement system away from sort of a guaranteed, defined benefit pension, Social Security, into a sort of set of private accounts that people should manage themselves. Now, if you, Patrick, if your numbers are right, that 2/3 of people are basically financially illiterate, that seems, there were many reasons for why that proposal obviously ultimately failed, but certainly one of them was fear of lack of financial literacy. But Maria, you just mentioned that yes, there are limits to what regulation can do, but we are in an aging society and we have gradually been shifting retirement schemes from defined benefit to defined contributions. And that seems rather reckless if your numbers, Patrick, are anywhere near right. So is there, should we then basically say all you can have in your contribution, defined contribution plan is sort of index trackers? Should you be allowed to do actively managed your own retirement account if these retirement funds, for instance, are tax preferred? Or is there a role for regulation?
Thank you. There's going to be a fight who's going to answer that question, I think. But let's take one more question there, please.
Thanks, Sami Haras from the SRB. I think you mentioned a very important point there, and that's the role of social media influencers and how this has really become an unregulated financial advice. And we urgently need to look into this. But I wanted to come back to the disadvantaged groups, and I'm very thankful that the Commissioner mentioned those disadvantaged groups and how it reflects that this issue of educating young people has been going on for decades. People have always said, oh, we need to do something about financial education. We seem to reach predominantly male, white, middle class people with all these initiatives. And if I also look at Professor Luzardi, how do you reach the people who are part of these disadvantaged groups? And what role do we as regulators have to play? If I look at the regulatory landscape, right, in the whole financial regulatory world of the EU, we've got a handful of women in leadership positions. We've got zero, nada, non-white or people who are read as non-white in leadership positions. What role does that play, and what's our responsibility here?
Thank you for a very, very important question. One question here at the front. And then we'll come. I'm sure all of you have got points for all three questions. Please.
Kurt Geisert, I'm one of the guides in the House of European History. I have a question for you, Mrs. Commissioner. You mentioned Croatia. Are you optimistic that in January we can welcome Croatia as number 20 in the Eurogroup?
Yes.
Commissioner, please, you go first.
Well,
Please.
I'd say yes to that question. On the very, to the gentleman who raised this issue of what you see is what you get, I think that's a work in progress. To my mind, where we need to target, apart from the school, and we've discussed education, is the organizations that work with people on the ground. And there are many organizations. And they will have direct access. But also we need to make sure that the language we use is appropriate, because sometimes that's very off-putting as well. I mean, if you have issues around your health, which and your financial health affects your physical health, you know, and you're struggling to put bread on the table, you know, sitting down and talking about concepts won't work. But there should be a way of using the resources of the charitable institutions or groups that have access and that are part of the community, because it won't come from the top down. But where education is key is that where we have education and children of all families mixed together, that's where you put the basis in of financial education, of all education. But there are still differences, because some households, the parents have an interest and in some they don't. And there's where you end up with vulnerable teenagers and vulnerable adults and all of the difficulties that go with that. But on your other points about male and white, and I'm white and female and whatever, those we are aware of that. And I think there is I suppose, an effort being made in the corporate world to address it. I mean, just on pensions, we could talk all day about pensions. Very difficult political subject in many member states as they try and increase the pension age. There's a pushback from older people. How many people are really able to manage their pension pot? Those who are very financially literate are. And the last point I'll make, and it's a provocative one really, I know banks and that are doing a lot of work around financial education. And yet my sense is that a lot of people, I'm going to say the word trust, but maybe not even that, but a lot of people feel very removed from the financial system, or they know they have to use institutions to get loans. They don't really regard them as friend, more foe. And that's something I think that's a problem as well. The financial crisis didn't help. It has really driven that wider, and I think we need to acknowledge that. But if we don't do something, and I think, Anna Maria, you're right, there's an opportunity now to deal with this in this time of crisis. It's a bit like what we're doing around energy use. I mean, I jest about the heat in the room, but it's time we switched it off. I mean, these are small, little steps around energy and efficiency that need to be translated into around your budgeting and your finance. I often laugh at the idea of buy now, pay later. It's get now, pay later, or forever. I mean, we also use terminology that it isn't quite what it says on the tin. But I go back to my core point. We need to educate children become adults that will question, not just absorb. And I fear that is where the work needs to be done.
Thank you for raising this new issue of new debt, the new ways of credit, which are actually another potential trap. Yeah. I just want to say that I take Jakob's point to be a warning that if the levels of financial literacy are what they are,
Yeah.
and the direction of travel on personal finance, including on long term, which is the pensions, that's that's the direction of travel. Then we are really sitting on a time bomb when we come to this issue. So we have been warned about this. Patrick, why don't you go first, and then we finish? I think we are closely coming to an end, but please, yeah.
Yeah, so I totally agree with your point that without financial literacy, managing your own investments, including your retirement provision, is fraught, and it could be seen as, at least indirectly, another mis-selling scandal. We've had many of them in various countries, not least the UK. And your point about distrust of the financial services industry, for good reason, has only made things worse, clearly. But I think it does make the case for. We've been talking today about financial literacy primarily in the context of the most disadvantaged in society, and making life easier potentially for people who are in poverty. But it's absolutely essential for everybody, really, to have a potentially big pension pot that is squandered into inappropriate investments is also going to be a disaster for those individuals. So I think there's a role for charities like ours to play in that. And if the industry can gain back some credibility that it lost over the past 10 years or so, then that they will have an important role to play as well. Arguably, the regulatory environment, which was, I know, tweaked in many ways to try and make it safer, there is an argument to say maybe it's gone too far and it makes advice less likely to happen in certain circumstances. We could debate that for for some time, but there's certainly an argument put forward by the financial services industry that the inability to easily wrap in commission-based advice and to have to pay for it up front means that people avoid it, rightly or wrongly, if they have to pay for it up front. Your point about diversity, I totally agree with you. We actually, as a charity, one of the 3 target constituencies for our work, alongside young people and women, is what we're broadly calling disenfranchised communities, and that will include those from an ethnically diverse minority background. And there is no easy way to get to people other than when you have very mixed school environments, for example. That should be feasible, but there's also a crucial need to go into communities and partner with trusted leaders in those communities, and that's part of what we're doing as well. I won't comment on Croatia.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Anna, your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to start with this topic about pensions because it's really so important. And I have to say, given the aging of the population and given also the labor market, where a lot of young people change jobs so often, in many ways, I do see these changes in pension as inevitable. We had to shift away from the defined benefit type pensions. And what I want to mention is, we cannot just shift the responsibility onto individuals and then say, good luck with it, and here is, the opportunity to manage your pension money. And this is why, by the way, financial literacy had started being relevant around precisely that time. And one of the reasons why we were talking about financial literacy 15 years or so ago was precisely because of the change in pensions. And in many countries, it was the responsibility of financial literacy was, for example, in the office of the pension commissioner. This is how it started, for example, in the New Zealand, one of the countries which have done a lot for financial literacy, or in Australia. So, I think the pension change per se should be one important reason why we need to focus on financial literacy. But I want to mention, we don't mean that, financial literacy is a substitute for regulation. we all need to work together. We need, in a sense, we need financial literacy, we need regulation so that people are protected when they make those financial decisions, and we need to have access to good and solid financial instruments. So financial literacy is not an alternative or just a panacea for the pension. And I just want to make sure that, we are making this clear, because all the countries are now facing this challenge. And as they change the pension system, I really hope that they realize how important it is to improve financial literacy. And this is why I always say the Minister of Labor and Pension should work together with the Minister of Education, because the two topics are very related. And then I want to mention briefly about this important topic about how do we reach the vulnerable groups. And this is critically important. And, beyond the school and beyond the workplace, which are very important places where to do financial education, where we can have a very wide reach. And where we should do targeted programs, not one size doesn't fit all when it comes to financial literacy. We have also to think of the community, as Patrick said. Financial literacy, it has to be not a top-down approach, but a bottom-up. And it starts with listening to the needs of people. And it starts with, at the community, engaging with the trusted partners, engaging with the institutions and associations that can, that have in mind, for example, and want to promote financial well-being. Eventually, financial literacy is about living better, is about making better decisions, is about the well-being of individuals. And as we think of all this support system, of all of this new policy, let's make sure that we incorporate that financial literacy into these policies, because that's what helps people have a better life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. But you have 30 seconds. Can you please tell us something about the wonderful research you've done on financial literacy and women? I can't help but ask the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As you know, this is a topic we are very passionate about, because what we have found, referring to the studies of Patrick, when we look at the global level, we find that financial illiteracy is much more prevalent among women. So around the world, financial literacy, women know less than men. And by the way, the criteria is you just need to know 3 or 4 questions of financial literacy. And these are very, very basic questions. So we are really touching upon the ABC. But what we also found is that women are the reason why they are less financially literate is not because they answer incorrectly to the financial literacy question. Often they say, I do not know. And this is important to realize in speaking about the nuances of financial illiteracy, because it is not just lack of knowledge, but sometimes it's lack of confidence. And this is why, as we do program for financial literacy, we have to make sure that we promote both knowledge and confidence. Somebody at the beginning started, I think it was the commissioner, that, everybody needs to have the knowledge and confidence to act upon that knowledge. And this is what we need to keep in mind and do when we try to think of financial literacy program in school. And when we, for example, if we look at women, we have also to be particularly mindful of improving their confidence in their knowledge so they can act upon it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We are really 10 seconds to the end of the hour. And with that, I think we need to wrap it up. I am very grateful to all 3 of you for coming here. Commissioner, for giving us the time. Patrick, I'm delighted to meet you in Brussels. And Anna, keep up the fantastic work. Bruegel will be a great admirer of your work and will fight the good cause. For the moment, thank you so much for joining us and hope to see you soon again in Brussels.
Thank you.
Thank you.